Before we get into today's show, I want to tell you about a new offering from MD Coaches. Group coaching for physicians is a small, virtual, confidential cohort designed to inspire participants to rediscover personal and professional fulfillment. The next cohort begins on Thursday, October 6th, and runs weekly until November 10th. And you can earn 1 CME credit per session, totaling 6 credits in all. To learn more and to register, visit www.mdcoaches.store. Space is limited, so be sure and register today.
But that there is a big, wide road between saying that racism doesn't exist anymore and that it is a fundamental organizational force of the entire society, and that we have to look for it and engage our confirmation biases wherever possible.
Paging Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Prescription for Success. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the podcast, which is a production of MD Coaches, providing leadership and executive coaching for physicians by physicians. To overcome burnout, transition your career, develop as a leader, or whatever your goal might be, visit MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone. And don't forget, CME credit is available when you listen with us. Just look for CMify in the show notes to learn how. Well, my guest today is a pediatric hospitalist in Spokane, Washington. She has a particular interest in critical race theory as it applies in medical practice. So let's hear my conversation with Dr. Erica Lee. I am really excited today to be speaking with Dr. Erica Lee, who is out in Spokane, Washington. And Erica, welcome to the program, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Because I think your origin story rightfully begins with your parents. If you don't mind, I would really like to start there. Tell us how your parents found their way to this country and what it's been like for you as the child of immigrant parents.
Oh, thank you very much for asking that. My parents were born in the 1940s, and shortly after, China was taken over by the communists. So in 1949, that was the year that my mom was born. And so when they were teenagers, that was the height of the Cultural Revolution. But by the time the Cultural Revolution occurred, there had already been the Great Leap Forward, which caused total economic collapse. And there was a 3-year period in the 50s called it's labeled a natural 3-year famine. It's nothing natural. It was completely due to policy failure from the Mao administration. And then, of course, that has left a lot of dissatisfaction and problems. And catastrophes like that tend to fuel revolutionary spirits. There are scapegoating and all that kind of sentiment. And so the Cultural Revolution happened in 1967 and lasted about 10 years. That was an exceedingly violent time when young school children and university students were completely radicalized and brainwashed to the point where they were going to exact violence upon their own parents and grandparents. And so at that time, people were divided into red categories and black categories. And the black types of people included, there were like 9 categories, like spies, and capitalists, industrialists, so forth. And the red categories of people consisted of revolutionary martyrs' families. I mean, of course, the martyrs are dead, so their families, by association, get the red status. There's the factory workers, poor farmers, and revolutionary soldiers. Those were the people's heroes. And when you divide up a society like that based on these identity categories and enact identity politics to the beat of like almost 10 billion people, there's going to be a lot of violence. And that is what happened. Yeah, that is what happened. So the black category of people were completely scapegoated. And my parents were children of Christian ministers. The Christian ministers were considered, I guess they were considered intellectuals, but also due to the Western association, because Christianity is a Western colonial religion, according to these identity politicians. And when the Red Guards, which were, they were not police, they were not military, they were sons and daughters of regular people who have been brainwashed by commissars. They would forcefully enter people's homes and ransack them to find so-called evidence of counter-revolutionary activity. And it's a complete witch hunt, right? Like they would find things like a piece of piano music. Oh, okay, you're into Western music. We want to, root out this Western culture.
How did your parents manage to escape?
Well, they didn't really escape. They stayed throughout the revolution. I have an uncle who we're no longer particularly close to, but he swam from mainland China to Hong Kong. And actually, my parents were not able to immigrate, but there was an opportunity for my grandmother to immigrate in 1980. And my parents at that time decided to send my 4-year-old sister along with her so that she can get out of the country. And we were able to immigrate later and reunite.
And so were you, I was not really clear from looking at your background information. Were you born in China, or were you born
in Shanghai?
In Shanghai. Okay. And so how old were you when you came, when you all came?
I was 10 years old.
Wow. That really brings up my curiosity. What was the culture shock for you like as a 10-year-old in a new country?
Biggest would be the fact that I didn't speak any English. I learned the words push and pull on the airplane because that's what's on the bathroom doors. Those were some of my first English words. And then one of the things that caused me a lot of anxiety was that like my English improved pretty rapidly over the next, but it takes like 2-3 years. Like people say, oh, you can, fit in 3 months. That's BS. I mean, nobody can learn a new language in 3 months. When you're not born, but it takes about 2-3 years to be proficient in the language. And by the time I went to middle school, my English was reasonably good. And then I was placed in the slow class because they just look at my background and you're an English learner, and I just was inappropriately placed academically in a class that was not like it was too slow for me, and I had like a lot of anxiety regarding how I'm not being productive and not learning as much as I could.
So you were in a public school.
Yeah, I was in a public school. Yeah,
and they had a curriculum that was making an attempt to help you transition to functional English. But it sounds like it was really not the best. Am I hearing it right?
Well, I had already spent a year at the Chinese Education Center in San Francisco, which helps children from Chinese-speaking background to get caught up with learning English.
But then, what was high school like for you? I mean, my goodness.
High school was tough. I went to Lowell in San Francisco, and you might have heard of it in the news. Currently, there's like a lot of controversy about it being a merit-based admissions. But basically, you have to have the academic, you have to prove yourself academically in order to get into Lowell.
Any significant problems getting into Stanford where you did your undergraduate work?
There are very successful people who attempt to apply to Stanford and do not get in. So I guess I was lucky to have.
And so at what point along that trajectory did you begin thinking about medical school?
The summer after junior year, because up until that point, I didn't really have a plan. Yeah, I was, I guess, like all idealistic kids, interested in saving the planet, and was kind of doing stuff with conservation biology. I did some internship. I did like a wildland studies for a summer. I was like a environmental intern for another summer. And then I just realized that I didn't really have a career plan. So it was like I was not pre-med up until that point and had to do all my pre-med stuff senior year.
Who needs a plan when your object is to save the planet?
Exactly.
So in that junior year, was there something in particular that you can point to that sort of pointed you toward a career in medicine? Or
it was meeting the right people. So I was like shadowing a genetic counselor. I thought, okay, maybe I guess I can be a genetic counselor if I have an undergrad and just add a couple years, and I would be in healthcare and stuff. And then she introduced me to her boss, who was a urology professor at UCSF. So that was kind of, what turned me around. But then I became like pre-med in my senior year. And so I was not on track to start medical school. Immediately after graduate, I had to have a couple of years off to finish all my pre-med.
Yeah, I noticed that you graduated with a BA, and that would indicate that maybe there was some more science to be obtained. But once you got to UC Davis, did it feel right? I know I for one, particularly back in the years when I was in medical school, that first couple of years thought, well, gee, this is just more college. Did you feel like you were in the right place when you got there, or did it take a little adjusting?
I think so. I think it was really nice that there's a brand new medical campus. Davis at that time had just relocated from Davis, the town, to Sacramento, where the medical center was.
At some point along the way, you clearly made the decision that you wanted to be a pediatrician. Did that come early, or did it take a lot of thought?
It's another late finding. Pediatrics was my last third-year rotation. And I think it has to do with, again, like the people who were nicer. That and the fact that I realized that there are a lot of intellectual stimulation associated with the field.
I don't think anybody has ever put it to me that way. And well, tell me some more about the intellectuals that you found in the pediatrics department.
Pediatrics is probably, in terms of its problem-solving approach, is closest to internal medicine. But the prognoses and the patient population tend to do better than internal medicine patients.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And then also I've realized that parents tend to know their children's medical problems better than older patients would know about themselves. That there is like something about like having children and take on the responsibility and being a parent that allows them to appear to be generally quite invested in what is going on.
So you got that decision out of the way, but then you make a geographical change. You're going to do your training in Los Angeles. So tell us what that residency was like.
The residency was, I really enjoyed. I think that was a much better time than medical school. Medical school is kind of developmentally awkward as a stage. Oh, and I didn't really answer your question about the intellectual stimulation aspect of pediatric. I mean, there's so much pathology that you have to know. It's a very broad field. You have to know the like neonates are nothing like a 19-year-old, and the differential diagnosis for any set of complaints is very, very different. So there's like, and then you have to know a little bit of hem-onc, a little bit of infectious disease, a little bit of each organ specific, neurology, nephrology, urology, all that kind of stuff. So there is definitely a lot of material to master and to integrate to be effective as a pediatrician. And then when I went to LA, it's a great department. I think the leadership is superb. And my personal academic advisor was the chair of the department, starting when I was an intern. So that's a little bit intimidating, but it also shows that generally that just doesn't happen. Like in most departments, as an intern, you don't hang out with the chair.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of that. So that's pretty cool. And was there a difference in the sorts of pathology that you were seeing, for example, between Sacramento and LA County?
In Sacramento, I was a medical student, so I only had, I don't know, like a couple of months worth of contact with pediatrics, maybe like a little more during fourth year. But fourth year, you're doing like your aways, so it's not in Sacramento. But LA, what struck me was, as a pediatrician, people go into pediatrics not thinking that managing gunshot wounds will be part of their bread and butter. There was a lot of gunshot, like some sort of violence-related admission involving either stabbings or gunshot, mostly gunshot in the adolescent population, which is not why most people want to become pediatricians, but that's part of it. And then the other big population that gets admitted a lot, of course, are the like oncology. Those become, the ones that come a lot. And
so you actually had some exposure to those trauma patients at LA County. I would have imagined that they would have surgical staff there to deal with that. But did you have a fair amount of exposure to the trauma?
Yeah, anybody who is under 18, I think, at least has to have a pediatric consult. That's just the hospital rule. So with those types of those types of surgical cases, it's generally a co-management model between a primary hospitalist team and a surgical team.
Hi, I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Here on RX for Success, we interview a lot of great medical professionals on how they grew their careers, how they overcame challenges, and how they handle day-to-day work. I really hope you're getting a lot of great information. But if you're looking for an answer to a specific problem, management or administration challenge, or if you're feeling just a bit burnt out, like maybe you chose the wrong career, well, then there's a faster way to get the help you need. No, it's not counseling, it's coaching. RX for Success is produced by MD Coaches, a team of physicians who have been where you are. I know you're used to going it alone, but you don't have to. Get the support you need today. Visit us at mymdcoaches.com to schedule your complimentary consultation. Again, that's mymdcoaches.com, because you're not in this alone.
We'll get back to our interview in just a moment, but right now I want to tell you a little bit about Physician Outlook. If you haven't discovered this remarkable magazine, please do so very soon. It was created by physicians for physicians to showcase the intersection between clinical and non-clinical interests, whether it's writing, painting, cooking, politics, and dozens of other topics. Physician Outlook gives a physician perspective. It's available online and in print. It's really unique among physician lifestyle magazines. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook amplifies the voice of any physician who has something to say. It also engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get 3 months free when you enter our promo code RX for Success and select the monthly option at checkout. That's a really great deal on this stunning publication. And now let's get back to today's interview. You know, in the early years of my practice, as a surgeon, everybody did their own intensive care, but as it got more complicated, you really did have to have of the profound changes that I've seen. I think I would probably rank that as number one. So, but anyway, this is supposed to be a conversation about you. Let's get back to you. At some point, I guess you were in that role for 3 years or so, and then made the decision that you wanted to move up to Spokane and become a hospitalist. And why don't you just tell us what was behind that decision?
Los Angeles and California politics and governance making it less appealing as a place to live and raise a family. The skyrocketing housing prices, a lot of policy failures that's causing a lot of civil strife.
Well, that's a good reason to go somewhere to improve your living conditions, and you made the decision at that point to continue in the role of a hospitalist rather than get into the private practice thing. You want to tell us how you came to that decision?
Well, I think that's really what I know how to do. When I was in LA County, big county, University of Southern California, I was also a hospitalist.
You're moving into a role that you were already familiar with, so to speak. Good.
Yes, except it's not an academic center, so it's more of, so it's slightly different. There are we supervise interns, but not in pediatrics. Like there are other specialties interns, and we don't have any senior residents. So it's a very different, so basically we are supposed to do all the work as opposed to just look over what residents do.
I want to segue from that now into what really caught our eye when we were looking for someone to interview. And that is your interest in critical race theory as it applies in medical practice. And I have to say that I have just absolutely been fascinated by what I've seen on your website and things that you've written. So tell us how this whole project came to be.
I guess I got interested in it because of how it heightens the identity politics that I talked about earlier during the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Some of our most esteemed medical societies are starting to embrace it. The American Medical Association straight out just says that we want to use tools from critical race theory in order to achieve equity. And equity is not defined as fairness. It is defined the way that Ibram X. Kendi has described, to use discrimination now against previously groups, like racial groups that were discriminating against other groups in the past. And that just harkens back to what was happening during the Chinese Cultural Revolution, where groups of people were given the black category and systematically scapegoated, saying that you previously had privilege.
So you were seeing things that caused you to remember some of the unpleasantness that you experienced in the country of your birth.
Well, I didn't personally experience, but it's definitely a multi-generational trauma that got passed down.
So it's not something you experienced, but you were aware of it. I think would have been a better way for me to pose the question. But something that I'm interested to know from you. So you're someone who has seen this to to the extreme. Do you think that human beings are sociologically wired to separate ourselves into groups? I don't think children do that unless someone instructs them to do it. What do you think?
Yeah, that leads to a lot of intergroup violence when people separate themselves based on arbitrary characteristics, which is why I very much embrace like small L liberalism that sees the universal. Like there are certain things that are universally true among all human beings, and according to critical race theory, which has a huge postmodern influence that posits that there is no such thing as an individual or something that's universal. All politics is based on group identities. And
you clearly have done some serious study on this subject, and I want to enthusiastically recommend to our audience that they check out your website, which is highly instructive. And maybe you can just give us a little description of what can be found at the website, and while you're doing it, tell people how to find it, because I think it's a really brilliant piece of work.
So it's criticalmedtheory.com. Critical is the word, and then med, M-E-D, theory.com. And I go through just some vignettes. Some of them are real. Almost all of them are real vignettes. And I don't like to tell people what to think, but I go through a comparison between the values that are espoused by critical race theory. It is our medical society started pushing this. For example, according to the Association of American Medical Colleges, which all medical schools belong to, they say that faculty have to role model how knowledge of intersectionality informs clinical decision making, or that medical faculty should teach how systems of power, privilege, and oppression inform policies and practices, and how to engage with systems to disrupt oppressive practices. I mean, this is like straight out of some Maoist or communist book. But I just explain how this set of values compare and contrast with the medical ethics that we learned about in medical school. And you decide. I have some discussion questions at the end that allowed the reader to decide whether you want to embrace this value system versus that. But what I do establish is that medical ethics as we know it and critical race theory are not compatible.
Well, what I think is most brilliant about the website, in fact, is exactly what you just were talking about, and that is there are far more questions in there than there are answers. And clearly that was the effect that you intended to bring about. Am I reading it correctly?
Yes, because nobody likes to be told what to think, and I do not do that. I don't tell you what to think on this website. I explore just 5 domains. They're usually in pairs. So the first domain is truth and knowledge. Second is power and privilege. Third, individuality and agency. Fourth, justice and equity. And fifth is humanism and civil rights. So those are the 5 domains that I explore and compare and contrast the values of critical race theory versus humanism and medical ethics.
Well, I think you've done a brilliant job of addressing the subject on the website. I'm very impressed with it, but I'm interested to know how this affects your own practice and your own way of life. How do you start a conversation on this subject without starting a fight?
Well, I think most people don't know a whole lot about this subject, despite the fact that it is a national conversation. But
that makes it scary from the outset.
I think most people are actually pretty curious, and that I don't try to tell them what to think. I just tell them that these are well, what is critical race theory? How do you define it? Well, it is a belief system predicated on the idea that white supremacy is the fundamental organizational force of society. Do you think that's true? Right? Like, we can explore whether any of its claims is true and whether there is evidence for what it claims. And I listen to what they have to say. And if they have like personal experiences of racism, I validate that. I'm not like those of us who are fighting against critical race theory and its encroachment into medical practice. None of us would ever make the claim that we are completely over racism and doesn't exist anymore. But that there is a big, wide road between saying that racism doesn't exist anymore and that it is a fundamental organizational force of the entire society, and that we have to look for it and engage our confirmation biases wherever possible.
Well, it's a really incredible piece of work that you have out there, and I truly do encourage people to take a look at it. Do you, on a day-to-day basis, try to engage people in conversation on this subject, or do you just send people to the website?
I won't force it if it comes up. I think that it's really important for us to not be afraid to talk about it, because intimidation is one of the tactics that's used to silence people when we try to push back, especially coming from my background. I have parents that survived the Cultural Revolution. I think that my perspective is very relevant.
Indeed it is. And I have really enjoyed this conversation up to this point, but we have reached the point, Dr. Erica Lee, where I'm going to close my mic and get out of the way. And audience, Dr. Erica Lee is going to offer us her personal prescriptions for success.
One of the ideas I would like to explore and promote is that medical trainees shouldn't always assume that you have to subspecialize. During training, I was pushed pretty hard by almost all of my mentors, who I all love and respect, to do a fellowship and become a subspecialist. And the reason they do that, well, partly because that's what they are, an academic medical center, and also because I'm perceived to be to enjoy intellectual stimulation and explore subjects deeply. But right now, I finished a very influential book to me called Range, R-A-N-G-E, Range, by David Epstein. And he makes a great argument about how generalists are some of the most important people that can change a field for the better and to innovate. So I would say that one of my advice to people who are thinking about going into medicine or are at different stages of training, to not always assume that subspecializing is the way to go. Fellowships are always out there. Even if you have been practicing for some time, you can still go back to fellowship. But once you're subspecialized, one of the things that limits you would be like where you could live, because a medical center would probably only need like a handful of nephrologists, a handful of cardiologists, but it would have a great need for a bigger need for general pediatricians or general surgeons or what have you. I mean, I also very much appreciate the advice or the consults I get from subspecialists. So if you have a personality and a passion, go for it, to subspecialize. But that's not for everybody. And the subspecialization in medicine, according to Dr. Jerome Groopman's book, How Doctors Think, the subspecialization trend tends to give medicine a false sense of certainty, whereas a lot of diagnoses require you to be interdisciplinary and think across different organ systems, different disease categories, in order to make an accurate diagnosis. Other things that young people should keep in mind, where you match probably doesn't matter that much. Just be happy that you have matched, and don't feel bad about yourself if you didn't get your top choice or top 2 or 3. Where you match is where you're meant to be, and you should celebrate that. Also, dating and trying to find a partner can be pretty hard in medical school or residency. It's very common to break up when people can't deal with long distance relationships. That certainly gave me a lot of anxiety when I was in medical school and in training, especially as a woman, because women generally try to find men who are of equal or higher status. But not only did I get married a little bit late compared to the general population, I got married when I was 34 and still had time to have 2 kids. Most of my other girlfriends who were going through training, who complained about not being able to find a man at the time, most of them got married as well. So you do have to put work into meeting people. You can't just like sit at home and wait for the FedEx guy or the mailman to you have to get out there, and it is work, but it also, for most people, does work itself out. And having kids is great. I do encourage you to have kids, and not necessarily wait until you're done with training. Like, there is never a perfect time to have kids. It's a lot of work, but children tend to distract you from all the other things that may be happening at work or in the world. And their bright smiles and giggles, they're really quite medicine for the soul. And finally, it's normal to have doubts that you pick the right profession. Being a doctor has many benefits. I don't regret going into medicine. I know that you may hear a lot of stories out there about how everybody's burning out, everybody's encountering moral injury, the corporatization, all the bureaucracies that is encroaching upon medicine, and all of these policies getting pushed by our medical society, especially injecting critical race theory into medicine. All those things are negatives, but it doesn't mean that having that relationship and taking care of patients is no longer a worthwhile endeavor. I do encourage people to consider medicine as a career, and that I'm still happy to have become a doctor. And there are many aspects of my job that I enjoy, both the interaction with the patients and the intellectual stimulation involving trying to find diagnoses for symptoms they're a little vague and difficult, and having colleagues to bounce ideas off of. So it's normal to doubt yourself, but medicine is a good field, and that's my prescription for success.
Well, Dr. Erica Lee, that is some really good advice, and I have to tell you that I'm really enthusiastic about your putting up there in the forward position to don't be afraid to be a generalist, because it is very satisfying. I did my training at a time when not everybody became a super specialist, and I remained a general surgeon throughout my practice, and I really, really enjoy it for exactly the reasons that you outlined, and I thank you so much for bringing that up. I also thank you for just being here to share your story with us. It's been quite fascinating. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to tell our audience where you can be found, where to find your website, and anything else you like to share, whether it be email addresses or whatever. So what would you like us to know?
Oh, so criticalmedtheory.com is my website. Again, that's criticalmedtheory.com. And my email is the same thing, criticalmedtheory@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter using the same handle as well. And I also just started a YouTube channel with the same branding.
Well, Dr. Erica Lee, once again, thank you so much for being here. It's been very informative and a lot of fun, and I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate inviting me on the show.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd really appreciate a review from you, and a 5-star rating helps give our podcast much more visibility, and that helps us reach more listeners. Exclusive content is available on our Patreon page, including membership-only material, like personal rapid-fire Q&A sessions with our guests. To be sure you never miss an episode, visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com to subscribe. And while you're there, learn how to get CME credit from CMify just by listening. Special thanks to Ryan Jones, who created and performs our theme music. And remember, be sure to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.